Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spiceworks Partner Webinar. I'm David from the community, and I'll be your moderator for today. The session that we're bringing to you is brought to you by Scale Computing, and we'll be discussing video surveillance and security hyperconverged. Before we turn it over to Dave, we will cover a few things about our console. As always, this session is being recorded, so if you miss any part of it and step away for any reason, you'll be able to get a link after today to view it on demand. Also, we do invite you to submit your questions for today's live session. We have a Q&A widget on your screen where it'll send us the questions on our side, and we'll get to as many of those as we can before we finish up. Scale's provided some additional information in the handout section, so take a look there before we're done today. And finally, we do invite everyone to join in the attendee chat. You can bring that up using the chat icon button there at the bottom of your screen and start a conversation with your fellow attendees. And as a reminder, we do follow the same community guidelines in our webinar chat. So while talking to others, keep things fun and professional. With that, I'll hand it over to Dave Demlow, our speaker for today. Dave is VP of Product Strategy at Scale. He comes to us with over 20 years of storage and software product management experience, and he joined Scale in 2010 and is responsible for all aspects of product management, technical support, and services. Handing it to you, Dave, to get started.
All right. Thanks you very much, David, and thanks to everyone who could join. So yeah, we're going to kind of dive right in. The topic is about video surveillance and security technology, how it can optimize and run very effectively with high availability on hyperconverged infrastructure, how it can reduce the overall footprints, lets you consolidate and centralize video management appliances or network video recorders that may be sitting there as kind of islands to manage. Before we dive into some of the content, it's always useful to kind of characterize who is attending. So I wanted to start off with a couple of poll questions. So first of all, are you currently running video surveillance software? And we'll give a couple of few seconds here for answers to come in. The reason to ask here, and I guess, well, the next question we'll dig into kind of who you are, but for people who aren't actively running video surveillance with Internet of Things and just general security and, COVID has all driven a really substantial rise in not only the use of video surveillance and security systems, but the things like the retention time and how they're used and the use for analytics and being incorporated into a wide variety of vertical business processes from retail that has very unique customer flow type requirements and things like that, to manufacturing that may use it for inspecting things coming off of an assembly line. So it looks like we've got a good chunk of answers, and 87% responded yes, they're currently using video surveillance. Let me go ahead to the next here. So yeah, everyone can see. So yeah, 86% have responded they are using video surveillance, and 13% are not, and probably considering it for a number of business reasons. So what we do see, and this is kind of the next survey question, so if you are running video surveillance, how are you running them currently? Are they currently virtualized? Are they non-virtualized? So some type of standalone purpose-built system, maybe a network video recorder, or are you unsure, or are you one of those that's not running video? So we'll wait for some answers to come in here. And one of the things we generally find is video surveillance was kind of the forgotten stepchild of IT in many organizations, and a lot of reasons that was a lot of businesses that was political. It might have been a totally separate team, might have been purchased through separate totally different channels. And let me go ahead here. It looks like we got a good number of answers. So nobody running Virtualize. So here is a good thing to talk about in this session. And 71% using some type of purpose-built system. So probably a network video recorder that sits there and is just loaded up with disks and records and so forth, and then a few that are unsure of the architecture. And there's other things, cloud is also has a definite role for many in video surveillance and so forth. So this gives me a good feel for kind of who we have on the call and where you are. And then there'll be one more poll question later, kind of where you fit in the organization. So let's talk about video surveillance and security. I mean, so some of the trends, I covered on a couple of them, but there's been a major shift from, analog video cameras, closed circuit television, used to be, tapes often used for recording and archiving video surveillance and security footage. Very limited use of what you can do with those. So, actually accessing those, finding things was complex and difficult. But now video can be streamed to as data to general purpose computing infrastructure. Even these purpose-built network video recorders are just x86 hardware, generally running Windows. A super high percentage of the video management software, or VMS, if you hear me use the term software, is Windows-based. There are some that are Linux-based, and as I mentioned, some that are cloud-based or even hybrid. But they're just applications that can run on standard boxes in many cases, but often are sold as purpose-built dedicated appliances. But we are seeing, as a result of integrating these into IT technologies and IT practices, really transform the ability of those traditional security systems to be utilized in other ways, integrated with physical security, integrated and be used by other business purposes. Retail is kind of the classic example, but most every industry has some use of incorporating video content into their day-to-day business processes. So the management challenges are, and for those of you, I assume on being a Spiceworks webinar, mostly on the IT side, and we'll drill into that next, the traditional management challenge of building server and storage infrastructure to support critical workloads that can scale out, that's easy to manage, so highly available, and easy to manage are really kind of key things. And then, cost and affordability is always something that's top of mind with any IT project. So that brings us into the poll question. So are you within your company in charge of video security, IT, or both? And the reason we're asking here is, not long ago, 5 to years ago, video security tended to be a separate department that bought their own systems, managed their own systems. IT was a separate that managed line of business applications, and there was very, very little intersection. I've done this kind of webinar to the video and security professionals that only view IT, and so there's some slides in here that I spend a lot more time on with them on what is virtualization, why would you virtualize, and so forth. So let me put up the results here. So we do have a little representation of that kind of traditional separated video and security department, and it still does exist in mainly larger and security oriented businesses, casinos, hospitals, hotels, tends to still be isolated, but even they're embracing standard IT practices because the technologies are very easy to leverage, and video security has a lot of other systems that it interoperates with. So you might have purpose-built recorders, but now you have a separate application for the access control or for your analytics machines and things like that that really bring the benefit of being able to virtualize those together, consolidate them, and provide high availability for the whole stack. So digging a little deeper, and again, I think when I do this when I do this with a just totally security focus, firm, all they care about is, streaming the video, getting the results, and the infrastructure underneath is often someone else's issue. But why would you virtualize video surveillance and security? And this is a document. Milestone is one of the top tier VMS video management software solutions. They have a very good document on designing large scale VMS systems. And so these are multiple recorders, often multiple sites. May have tens or hundreds of video recorders just for the scale out capability and capacity. And some of the things they say, it offers, a range of benefits, when it's being used along with standard IT installations. And this comes from things like cloning servers, being able to rapidly deploy and scale out new systems, just the portability of virtual machine images, so being able to move them from one system to another, or being able to even go in and virtualize existing hardware systems. Many of these VMS recorders are old, but they're running Windows, older versions, things like that could be P2V migrated into a hyperconverged infrastructure, and get rid of kind of that old creaky, low performing infrastructure, and brought into to a modern system with high availability support and automations and self-healing and all those kinds of things. So virtualization obviously provides live migration from one physical server to another, for maintenance, for upgrades, for replacements, for scaling out. And this is a very, very video really is a real good use case for scale out. The retention requirements almost always go up rather than down. The bandwidth required, the resolution on digital cameras and more cameras are constantly being added. Another thing driving the retention is the use. If you're starting to do analytics, you want to keep more and more history available for those analytics purposes, as well as legal retention, things like that. So virtualization and just the what we're all familiar with as IT professionals, the ability to scale out compute capacity, add on storage, scale out your overall infrastructure in a hyperconverged environment, which we'll go into more, is really a key thing that's very foreign to the kind of traditional VMS workspace. So, this again, for kind of the video surveillance, virtualization the old way, most of them have never seen or heard of any of this. The old 3-2-1 architecture, inverted pyramid of doom, going out to multiple vendors, buying hypervisor software from vendor A, storage, backend system SAN or NAS from vendor B or C, putting them on server hardware from vendor D, and networking from vendor E, and coordinating all the integration, all the support, all the maintenance, all the upgrade tasks. That's, certainly in that world is not even something they would ever consider. We know as IT professionals, that's just not necessary or desired. So virtualization the new way, and hyperconvergence in general across, a wide variety of systems has kind of become the adopted best practice for how do you build a resilient scale out infrastructure. And obviously with the HD3 system, we provide, easy benefits like web-based management, no separate server required to manage the infrastructure. It's just built into the scale out nodes, non-disruptive system upgrades. So when there are new versions of Hypercore or BIOS updates or new capabilities that we want to deploy, we can deploy them across an HD3 cluster without shutting down workloads, without any downtime. Self-healing architecture is really important for everybody, but especially in these video environments where you don't have access to IT personnel or expertise. And in many cases, we don't get a lot into edge computing in this presentation, but one of the big drivers of the video surveillance is in these remote edge locations. Retailers that have tens, hundreds, or thousands of stores that don't have IT people but have critical IT needs, including video surveillance, just as an example. So self-healing architecture that's really designed to let things fail, compute around them, keep the system overall up and running the critical applications without requiring IT intervention. And then kind of some day one things, rapid deployment, getting it up quickly, right? Deploying new applications quickly, scaling out the system, and then all of the data protection and management capabilities and options that you get when you virtualize resources onto a hyperconverged HD3 platform. So hyperconverged for video surveillance, and this is just the definition. It's just the integration of that compute, the storage, virtualization layer, and management into that single solution architecture. So this slide here, for the video professionals is, hey, you don't have to become experts in all of these pieces. We provided a out-of-the-box, turnkey, highly available system that really manages itself so that your, in this case, critical video surveillance workloads are up and running. Not only do they keep recording, but you retain access to the data. And we'll go through some of the, how kind of in, the pure video ecosystem, how do they do resilience and so forth. So, And for those who are more IT focused, this will look familiar for some very old applications where you would have these a SQL database cluster. You would use Microsoft failover clustering. I think is actually mentioned here, which I think in IT we rarely hear about much anymore. Certainly not with a shared storage kind of configuration. But kind of the old way in video surveillance is you've got a bunch of different kind of video infrastructure services. A management server. A database server on the back end, event servers that does notification. You may have a remote access server that transcodes videos for streaming it out to iPad devices or video walls, things like that. All of those are separate roles that very often are designed on separate physical servers, and many of them are critical that require their own level of clustering. So you see, and this is out of that same Milestone document that I referred to. This is their diagram for how you would build a highly available, larger scale system. As you would build these little clusters, island clusters for each of these critical components. Many of them you would have active passive. So you're almost doubling your resource requirements in all cases for that. And then the recording servers, which are generally where the biggest data volumes occur. Most VMS systems do have some level of recorder level functionality, and generally the way it works is you have a standby passive recorder that's sitting there watching its primary, and if the primary goes down, it basically connects out to all the cameras, redirects their streams to the secondary recorder, starts capturing new data on the secondary. But until you repair, replace, restore the primary, you don't have access to the historical data there. So it's just kind of a way of continuing to get new data without necessarily giving you immediate access to the data, to archival, existing recorded data. And of course, you're using very high resource requirements because you have that passive systems sitting there, basically waiting for something to do. Moving all that onto HC3, you have a number of different options. So one, all these different roles you can put as separate VMs. You can load balance across a hyperconverged cluster. The recorders, and you can see in the diagram, it may be a little bit small. Those can be, all virtual machines, and a best practice would be to design more smaller recorder VM virtual machines so that you have seamless failover. So in this case, I think we have a 4-node cluster with 8 recorders as an example. And given the way that we've designed this system and sized this system, if one of those nodes goes down, there's plenty of RAM and compute available for the two recorder VMs running on any node to fail over to 2 separate different nodes. So, but I'm not doubling. I don't have half of my resources sitting there waiting for something to do. And this applies to both failure cases as well as system level rolling upgrades if I need to upgrade this HC3 system. And then the other thing I mentioned a little bit early on is security today has any number of applications that depend on it, that utilize its data, whether it's for analytics, whether it's for access control. They would tie into the same infrastructure, as well as the overall VMS system has normal dependencies on Windows infrastructure. Needs a domain controller for security access. It might need an ADFS server. It may need DNS, IP, DHCP, things like that. I may need a file server for exporting configuration backups, things like that. And in many environments, without virtualization, without hyperconverged, those would all be separate systems to manage, to patch, to upgrade, to ensure for high availability. So that's really why why the video surveillance should be virtualized, and some of the benefits that you get by doing so. So again, to kind of summarize why hyperconverged infrastructure, you get that simplified single pane management. You're not going to a bunch of different boxes with a bunch of different failover clustering technologies, rapid, easy deployment of the entire infrastructure, including putting on those video, the video management system components, easy to deploy as virtual machines, easy to scale up and so forth, intelligent automation of any tasks. HC3 has a full REST API. So if you wanted to orchestrate and script, here's how I build a remote retail site. I've got, these 5 core infrastructure services. I've got this recorder. Those can all be VMs that you import, that you build up in an automated fashion using a REST API, using tools like Ansible. So you can really automate the environment at scale, both within a single site and across sites. You get that high availability that keeps all these components up without having all the full complement of passive resources sitting there. You've got the self-healing infrastructure that's designed to absorb failures, whether it's a node node down or a drive failure, network cable goes bad, any of the things that we all know happens day to day in IT. A system that's designed to find those, prevent those whenever they're possible, and then obviously correct and keep the applications going. You do get the capability to buy what you need when you need it. Often when you're sizing a video surveillance system, you'll get asked questions, well, what's it going to grow to in 5 years? Well, what cameras am I going to have in 5 years, and what applications, and what are the retention needs going to be of the business? It's hard to predict. So as always, people tend to overbuy. They tend to guess. They don't want to be boxed in or have to do a forklift upgrade in the future because they underbought. Whereas Hyperconverged is really designed to plan around that. You can buy what you need. You can add on the specific resources that you need when you need it. And this is kind of one of the myths of Hyperconverged, that, you've got to scale out everything together. If I just need more storage capacity, I've got to buy a node with compute. And while that's somewhat true, I mean, all these nodes have some level of compute in them because they're of the Hyperconverged architecture. We in HD3 and most other systems do provide the ability to just do very storage heavy nodes. We have a mode, what we call storage only mode, where you can bolt on additional nodes to an existing HD3 cluster, disable the compute. So it doesn't even show up as a place to run workloads. It just adds scale out storage capacity and redundancy to the pool. And if you're doing that, you'd of course buy the least expensive CPU, just enough RAM for the core operating system. So you can add, high capacity storage without, having to buy, dual 64 core procs or high levels of RAM, things like that. So you really can pick and choose what you need. Or conversely, you don't know for sure yet, but in 3 years you may have more analytics. You might need some GPU resources to add to the cluster and consume that resource locally. Scale's always provided mix and match capability within reasons. There's things that don't make sense to put within the same clusters, but you can then, in that case, have separate clusters, but you can add on to the infrastructure, be able to manage it the same way, and really have that. The goal is to have evergreen infrastructure that you never need to throw away completely and start fresh and migrate. You can just keep growing and evolving. And we could do this all without any expensive, complex third-party virtualization licensing or feature licensing, things like that. So with the HD3 system, the hypervisor is built in. We don't use VMware. It's open source KVM with our own management, intellectual property, and very sophisticated storage stack built in. But there's no VMware licensing. There's no other management software or hypervisor that you need to buy. So everything's in the box. What do customers value most? It obviously varies, but the simplicity is really key. Unified management, one console, everything is pre-configured. The storage deploys in well under an hour. Literally the experience is, the typical 3-node cluster that most people start with. You take them out of the box, you cable up 4 networking ports, you cable up redundant power, you plug them in, give them IP addresses, you point them to each other, and in about 5 minutes, they are now clustered together and act as a single unit. You point a web browser to any one of the nodes, it doesn't matter which one, there's no master, and you start creating VMs. And later on here, I'm going to do a quick demo of the HD3 user interface so you can kind of see the ease of use. We'll actually look a little bit at some video surveillance applications running. High availability. For most, that's just kind of a given, but it's not just failover capability. It's true self-healing to be able to correct software, hardware problems that happen across the cluster without requiring an operator to go in and type a command or do things. And in the many years we've offered HD3, we've continued to enhance and expand as we find new things that happen in the real world that we can address programmatically with automation. Those get built in, and so the system just becomes better and better in terms of its ability to detect and prevent issues and self-heal and keep the applications running. Backup and replication, built-in key ability, and again, in video surveillance, you may not You may not do replication or backup per se of the video data, meaning that the resilient storage is even more important. But there's always configuration data, things like that, and then all these other infrastructure. It's like a domain controller down, or could take down an entire VMS system. So having all those resiliency, built-in high availability, failover, easy backup and replication built in, and availability is key. Disaster recovery as a service, being able to do that offsite or to a cloud. We have a cloud-based DR offering that's available that is for site level failures, things like that would address. Scalability, being able to start, and in the video space and small sites, we actually do see use cases for single node HD3 systems where you don't have the full cluster availability from day one. You can add that on later and cluster out, but we do see some cases more where the video tends to be like a cache. So it's there, keep a couple of days worth, and then it gets archived off to a central video management system in the central site, or just archived to cloud storage or things like that. Smaller single node operations, but that are still managed within the HD3 framework can make sense in those cases. Mix and match, the ability to take new faster, more powerful nodes that are going to be available in 2 and 3 years, add those into your existing clusters without being constrained to the same exact type of architecture is a key. And then affordability is just kind of a given. Everything's in the stack, the hardware, software support, and overall generally much lower price and ongoing costs. So video surveillance infrastructure, I talked about this a little bit. I mean, the key pieces, and these may be all in the same cluster or they may be distributed, are kind of those recorder VMs. And we'll talk about some of the specific VMSs, but I mentioned earlier, generally for load balancing, for high availability, one of the advantages of Hyperconverged is that you can split up. Instead of one big recorder and maybe a second big standby recorder doing nothing, you can split it up into smaller pieces and virtual machines. For example, this infrastructure here was actually set up for it was an 800 camera implementation, which is fairly high, for most organizations. That was actually kind of a casino scale system that was being designed. Each of the individual recorder VMs was tasked with 100 cameras that it was archiving and storing the data there. A lot of storage on this particular cluster, obviously, and they had very long retention rates that required high capacity storage there. But in this particular configuration, if they needed to add more, they could add on additional nodes there and just basically keep scaling out. And then, of course, scale out easily across multiple clusters. Everything doesn't need or generally need to be a single cluster. It's very easy to manage 2 or 3 or 4 clusters, or even many more across multiple locations. But it gives you that kind of flexibility to spread the load out. And from a cost perspective, most of you know in IT, it's often very, very expensive to buy the biggest, baddest, new CPU, highest, memory count system. And this really leverages, the economies of scale of being able to distribute that load across smaller, less expensive systems without having to have half your resources sitting there idle for failover, or B, have to buy those really big systems. Very often more smaller systems that can do more work are much more cost effective than that biggest bad server with the latest greatest technology. So in terms of beyond video surveillance, I touched this a little bit, but HD3 runs them all. So, virtual machines, containers, Kubernetes, your database applications that are doing analytics, CRM, ERP, CRM, file storage, video storage that we've talked a lot about, backup, web applications, messaging, email, VoIP, all your infrastructure stuff, Active Directory, network appliances like firewall, security, VDI, remote desktop, terminal services. These are all applications that run great on Hyperconverged that you can centralize. You can get the benefits of centralized management. As a matter of fact, I don't believe I mentioned, we did a recent survey of our customers. one of the reasons we're doing this is we found an enormous growth in the number of our existing customers that were deploying video surveillance, and it just kind of happened because of those reasons that that I deployed. But it was as the time of the survey, which is a little while ago, was 20% of HD3 customers reported running video surveillance was one of the applications on their system, along with all these other things. And then separately through partnerships and very specific hardware offerings, working with VMS providers like Milestone and Mirasys and many others, we've seen doing much more in the purpose-built video surveillance system where, again, like the 800 camera example that I showed you there. So let's do a quick look at the HD3 user interface. We mentioned a lot about ease of use, so let me share my screen here. And we're going to look on an actual HD3 cluster here. All right, so I have my screen sharing. So this is the HD3 web user interface. I'll probably bounce around to a couple of different clusters. For those who haven't seen it, the ease of use, this is it. Like I mentioned, if I had just taken these out of the box, cabled them up, given them IP addresses, pointed them to each other and said, okay, form a cluster, this is where I would be. I'd point my web browser to any one of these nodes or its IP. And at that point, I'd have an empty cluster and go from there. I could create a new VM, right out of the gate, demo. What do I want to do? Am I installing Windows or some other operating system? I want to give this, virtual machine 8 CPUs. Let's give it 16 gig of RAM. I have a boot drive of 100 drive, but I'm doing some video, so I'm going to give it 8 terabytes of storage here, or maybe I'm going to give it multiple 8 terabyte drives or whatever. What am I going to boot from? This is where you would pick your operating system images, so forth and go. So here we'll just go ahead and create that. This cluster, actually, because we've just been deploying via images, we don't have ISOs we can install, but it creates it. And at that point, I can power it on. This could actually be pixie booting and grabbing an image that way. And then if I was importing existing machines, I would use this path. What VM, where is it located? Access to get to that VM image that's offline, import it into the system and configure it as I need and go. So here we do have actual lower end video surveillance system running. Let me see. I'm not sure what I got here. Let's click on one of these. If I want to actually see what's going on inside the VM, I just click on its console and you get a built-in viewer here. We won't go ahead and dig into this. I'm doing some testing here on just a one-off on a particular VM. So this is a Milestone XP. I think I've got 100 cameras right now going here, and I'm just doing some quality monitoring. So 100 cameras, 30 frames a second. This medias per second should be average about 3,000, which is what you see. And so just looking at some performance data there. But, the key is it's just an application. It's just a Windows application. Going back to this particular system, Milestone 2 here is actually the management server. It was originally configured that it could store some data, but at this point, it's not recording anything. It's just acting as the management server for all the other recorders. And again, the key is alongside with these applications, I could be running other things side by side and so forth. Certainly would encourage anyone who wants to get a deep dive on kind of all the HD3 features, live migration, snapshots, scheduling, remote replication, all of that. We have regular scheduled demos you can sign up to on our website, and they can go through all these features and in about 30 minutes effectively train you to be an HD3 administrator. All right, so let me unshare here. All right, so I've covered a lot of these. So again, VMS software, it's just a virtual machine. All the VMSs, we've seen in test run on either Windows or Linux. They can be easily installed inside a virtual machine. We have even seen some virtual appliances that you just import. Normally they're Linux-based under the hood. Some of the software that we've tested or have customers running, Milestone Protect. I'll talk, we're actually listed on their Milestone Marketplace with a couple different configurations, some of which are unique. Genetec Security Center, Omnicast are their product name, Digital Watchdog, Blue Iris is a popular kind of entry-level one, Pelco Video Expert. We've recently done a little testing on Axis. But the key is these are software applications that read data over an IP network from storage and camera devices, write them out to storage, and they run great on Hyperconverged. As I mentioned, we are Milestone verified with a couple different configurations listed on the Milestone Marketplace. We have several others that are in the process of being reviewed and submitted. So we can definitely help you with sizing and so forth there. One of the things I would point out is one of the applications there is a very entry-level system. It was 50 cameras, 54 megabit cameras running on our HE150 platform, which is our small form factor system, very, very low cost. It's about a 4x4 by 2-inch cube. If you're familiar with an Intel NUC, that's the form factor to picture. And we actually verified that. That's a very common, popular platform for small retail branch offices or locations or things like that, where they might be running video surveillance along with point of sale, along with environmental control, along with access control for the the doors or parking systems or things like that. Maybe even managers' workstations, things like that. All on a cluster of these kinds of small devices, and that's one of the configurations that is listed up there. Well suited for distributed edge locations, retail, entertainment, hospitality, manufacturing, and it really depends on kind of the scale. I mean, it's a very similar if you've looked at virtual desktop infrastructure. A common best practice safety thing is certainly for larger environments is it's a different resource. Put it on its own independent cluster, and if you've got hundreds of desktops, totally makes sense to do that. I'd say the same with video. If you're doing, hundreds of cameras, enough that you can justify a dedicated system, put it on its own isolated system, because at least from other major, critical applications, because the workloads are unique, and you can tune that infrastructure for that workload particularly. Kind of same thing like VDI. In others, consider the benefits of running other physical security applications, infrastructure servers like AD on the system. Certainly, if you're at the point of I'm going to go put these on a separate box that I now have to manage, it should either be a separate cluster or it should be or integrated onto the same cluster. And without getting too deep, HD3 on the storage perspective does provide the ability to, on a per virtual disk basis, if you have a cluster that has different tiers of storage. For example, it's very common, we offer systems that have both flash storage and spinning disk storage. In a video surveillance application, you would want to run the Windows operating system in the database, mostly using that flash data, and store the video surveillance on the spinning disk. There's no reason to put it onto flash. There's no reason to put it on flash and then down tier old data off of flash onto spinning disk. Spinning disk, and especially the way we treat spinning disk as we pool it together, it's totally adequate, more than performant enough to do very, very high capacity video surveillance. As a matter of fact, the screenshot of the cluster that I showed you was entirely spinning disks. 18 spinning disks per node in that configuration, 4 nodes, and doing 800 cameras full of archiving. So there's some parameters there. Sizing examples. So I did mention on the Milestone Marketplace, the kind of that entry-level system. It's a very compelling system based on our HE150. It's an i7 CPU, 6-core, 12 threads, up to 64 gig of RAM, up to 4 terabytes of NVMe. So you're not going to store a lot of data on there. So if your retention requirements are high, that may not be the platform, or you may need. We actually did in the validation tier data from on-prem off to Azure File Sync storage. So it actually lived on-prem for a while and then tiered up to Azure storage. There's a lot of different options that you have there for archival storage, and that is a common function of most VMS, is to be able to say, write it first here on my local D drive, and then after 7 days, 30 days, certain criteria, move it off to some other volume, a NAS volume, a cloud volume, things like that. So that's often possible. Medium, we get into probably our 5000 series system, our 5200 cluster, or 5250, which are the tiered systems where you have both spinning disk and flash. And those are in the 100, 75 per node, maybe up to 100, depending on the configuration and the CPU. We can help you through some of those there. A single node system, if you were looking there, might be in the 50 to 100 camera range, depending on what CPUs are in them. And then when you get into larger, we have verified configurations that we've gone through in the 1,000+ camera range, generally with multiple clusters. in making sense in some of those cases. But we do partner with integrators, with companies that have extensive experience, and we can, at that scale, custom design the right hardware software platform and configuration for you. So get on the phone with us and let's talk about the performance needs, the retention needs, and so forth there. So some general solution design configurations, follow the VMS system requirements. Most of them I've seen are really good. I mean, they'll have calculators for how many cameras are you going to have, what's their bit rate, are you doing constant recording, are you doing recording on 20% motion, how long you're retaining data, what frame rate are you doing, and we'll give you guidelines not only on the amount of storage that you need for that, and it is just math, and in some cases we'll even recommend kind of CPU resources, number of NICs, things like that. In Hyperconverged, I guess that's another benefit. For above a certain scale, you would definitely just go 10 gigabit networking, where you kind of just don't have to worry there. And not only is it 10 gigabit networking, you've got 10 gigabits into multiple nodes. You're distributing that network load against multiple nodes. So network on the 10 gig generally doesn't become an issue, even on the very, very high end. Don't skimp on CPU cores and cycles. Processing video takes a lot, and so that generally tends to be one of the more critical sizing factors. As I mentioned, 10 gigabit at least at your network backbone is recommended. Anywhere at medium large scale, and the rest of the network can be 1 gig. That's totally fine. But as long as the paths into the cluster and then the cluster within itself for things like live migration and data mirroring is 10 gig, that's plenty. I covered consider archiving to off primary system, SAN, NAS, or cloud if that's needed for very long-term retention. Already talked about splitting recording servers across the nodes for load balancing purposes, distributing other roles. And then, again, multiple clusters are easy to manage. I don't know if you caught when I did the demo. I have browser tabs up with a bunch of different clusters. There's even ways from within one cluster to drill through to another. And then at a large scale, we offer a multi-cluster management view as well that makes it very easy if you've got multiple clusters or different locations. And then lastly, just from a performance, the wide striped, which is the term for using all the disks all the time, not recorder on node 1 writes to data on disks on node 1 and maybe on node 2. Wide striping is distributing I/O and capacity across the entire pool of disks, whether they're spinning or whatnot, to aggregate performance and capacity. For video especially, I mean, that's just really the ticket here. And it's not just the performance ongoing, it's when one of those drives inevitably fails and you've got a large 12, 16 terabyte drive that's in a video environment going to be full. By design, you didn't buy the storage to not use, a high percentage of it. So rebuild time does become critical. And the way HD3 storage is designed is if one of those drives fails, it's an all-to-all automatic rebuild. First of all, you don't have to go do anything. We detect that the drive failed. Matter of fact, in virtually all cases, we'll detect it's about to fail, like we're starting to get excessive errors or other things have happened to the drive that we will actually proactively evacuate its data before it's actually gone. But even in that case of the demo, where somebody goes and just yanks a disk out of the system, okay, we've lost a small percentage of the overall capacity of the cluster, but it's still a lot of data. We've got another copy of everything that was on that drive, but we need to recreate a new mirror for whatever data existed there. That's an all-to-all operation. So all the other remaining disks are used, and the free capacity that remains on all the other disks is used. So it's as fast as you can get in terms of rebuilding even that large disk after a failure. There's no parity calculations like in a RAID or so forth. Quick case study. And these are available online and probably on the resources. Jerry's Foods is a grocery chain retailer, has 50 locations, and they've got some other things, retail beyond grocery. They required easy video surveillance system. It was reliable. Each store has anywhere from 80 to 100 cameras, and they expect that to continue to increase as they're starting to use it, look at using analytics and things like that. They needed generally 30 to 45 days of footage to assist with fraud protection and liability claims, things like that. A side note, and I think this is probably available to stream somewhere. One of their stores was in Minneapolis, was impacted by riots last summer. They were able to basically go in and retrieve the video off their entire HD3 system, literally take the HD3 cluster out of the store and have immediate access to all of their footage as well as their data just by lifting and taking the entire system out of the store. With lots of other customers really across the scale, from small businesses, medium, large, enterprises that have multiple distributed edge and remote locations. Typical logo slide here. Highly rated. We really take these reviews very, very seriously. 5-star on Spiceworks, as well as a number of other community organizations and sites out there. Encourage you to take a look, and chances are you can find some company just like you in the same vertical, same size, maybe right down the street from you that is using HC3 and would have great things to say about it. And this is really the last slide here, just kind of an overview of our product line, starting at prices here. So you can kind of see, and this is important, we cover the full range. We've talked a lot about these small devices for edge and small businesses. We go up to very, data center, all NVMe, high performance storage configurations, and then everything in between. Again, these are clusters, these are scale out. So, in some cases, 6 HE500s are going to be your better solution versus 3, HE 1250s, whatever. And our systems engineering team can help design, the right solution with the balance of capacity, performance, and cost for you. And with that, I'd like to see what we have in terms of questions.
All right. Yes, we've got some questions in from the audience, and a reminder to everyone, keep getting those in. We'll get to as many as we can. Let's look at this first question from the IT guru. He's asking, my understanding is video is very write intensive with most storage going SSD. Is this going to be an issue?
So yes, it can be, and I mean, write intensive there's a balance of, well, there's different types of drives, first of all. So you'd want to, for the use case, look at the amount of data that's constantly being rewritten, and make sure you have the right durability on the drive. The other thing is that in a cluster configuration, you're distributing the data across multiple SSDs, so it's all being striped across multiple nodes. So in the case of, I mentioned the HE150 was that entry-level system, which is all flash, it's NVMe storage with the 50 camera. That was actually one of the things I validated, was that load, it wasn't just could it do it, and it was way easy to do it on CPU and network and things like that. Was the right endurance there? And it was definitely within the 5-year warranty period at that workload. But if you were doing more cameras, more turnover of that data, it wouldn't be. I think I also mentioned in the tiered environment, tiered clusters, we would recommend that, and this is, we have this flash priority that you can set. You can set the priority of the data storage disk down to 0. And so the operating system would be using flash and tiering and the database and all that goodness. The data storage for the video recording would be using all spinning disks. So you can do that within the same cluster with same VM, and it's just a slider to click over. And you can also do all spinning disks. So we do have clusters and nodes that are all spinning disks, no flash whatsoever. There's we've actually those have also been certified, as I said. So there's, depending on kind of what your needs are. If you're running just video, the all spinning disk may be the way to go. If you have other applications, or there's components of your video things that say have a database tier that would benefit from flash, you can use that heat priority slider to kind of get both.
Okay, let's look at another one here. What does the additional licensing fees for the virtualization software look like for HC3?
Well, as I mentioned, everything is included. So there's no other hypervisor license. We don't use VMware. There's no vTax. So the hypervisor capability, the management capability, all the features that I talked about and discussed are built in to HC3. It comes pre-installed on the appliance, and everything you need out of the box is there and included.
All right, great. Let's look at a question from Alan. Alan's asking, is there integration with cloud storage?
Okay, great question. Well, within HD3, we do have integration with the DR as a service, what we call Cloud Unity offering, which happens to be Google Cloud, both compute and storage. As far as the video piece or general cloud storage integration, basically it would all be done with something running on HC3. So one example, as I mentioned, using Azure File Sync, which is a capability that you just load a Windows file server, you enable Azure File Sync, plug it into your Azure cloud storage, and anything that you write to that share that looks like a local Windows share, you can set up policies that say, okay, keep it on this share for 7 days, or when I hit a certain capacity. And when it exceeds that, it just gets stubbed. So it looks like it's still there in that folder, but it's actually removed from your local storage and only exists on Azure cloud storage. And it'll get retrieved if the user or the VMS accesses it. So that's one way of doing cloud integration. On the backup side, the backup offerings that we have, for example, Acronis Cyber Protect has cloud integration for backup storage, and we'll work with pretty much any cloud or their own cloud. So a couple different ways to do that. There's other cloud storage gateways out there that customers have used. Masuni, a couple others kind of in that category where you would be, running a workload on HC3, looks like a local file server, has some local cache storage, and then backs that up with some form of cloud storage behind it.
Okay, let's look at another couple here. Is this HC3 solution solely dedicated to my VMS, or can I deploy other applications alongside my VMS as well?
So this is the HC3 productized offering is you can run VMS and anything else alongside that. There's no restrictions. So it's I think most of what we're going to see in kind of the general IT workspace is those mixed use. It's going to be, I've got a couple of recorders, I've got my security applications alongside my file server for user data, or things like that. I do think that's going to be the predominant thing. On the very large end, if you there are basically OEMs of HC3 software that may sell HC3 based appliances that are restricted to just video applications, but the HC3 scale branded products that you would buy are can run everything.
All right, good deal. Let's finish with this one here. I'm an integrator and would like more information on the solution. How can I get in contact with someone to speak about becoming a partner?
Okay, well, I guess, if notes here will let us know. But yeah, go to scalecomputing.com. We have information there on our partnership program for IT integrators, as well as video integrators, which often are same, but in some cases different kinds of organizations. And we can talk to you about the program and the benefits, and all the various promotions and access that you would have access to.
All right. Well, with that, that's about it for our time today. Thank you, Dave, for taking us through all that information and the demo, and appreciate you going through all those questions. Special thanks to Scale for sponsoring this great webinar today. I want to thank everyone for spending some time with us and going through all this information. We do invite everyone to still check out those handouts, so take a look at the case studies and additional information provided by Scale. And also, we are providing the winner of our contest in the attendee chat, so take a look there, and congrats to our winner. We look forward to spending another hour with y'all all again for a partner webinar soon, so take a look in our community for upcoming events. Until then, stay safe and keep it spicy. Take care, everyone.